It was a cold autumn morning in New York. Alyssa walked down the street, absorbed by the urban sounds and the hustle and bustle of the city. The wind made her clothes flutter, and the smell of the city filled the air. She was 23 years old, with brown hair, heading to her favorite cafe for work. Life seemed normal, with no major surprises. But that morning, everything would change. As she walked absent-mindedly, a strong hand grabbed her arm. Before she could react, something damp and with a strong smell was pressed against her face. In an instant, her vision blurred and she lost consciousness. The last thought she had before passing out was the sensation of being pulled into a dark, unknown place. When Alyssa woke up, the world around her was completely different. She was in a small room with concrete walls. The light was dim and she felt dizzy and disoriented. She tried to get up but quickly realized she was chained to a chair, her wrists still burning from the pressure of the cuffs. Her mind raced, trying to comprehend what had happened, trying to process the situation she was in. "Calm down," a deep voice said. "You'll be okay here." Alyssa turned her head quickly and saw a man with a rugged appearance, a scruffy beard, and a serious expression. He was standing in the doorway, watching her, with his hands in the pockets of a leather jacket. He didn't seem in a hurry, but his gaze was intense. Who are you?" Alyssa managed to ask, her voice hoarse. The man gave a slight nod, as if trying to figure out what to say. "My name is Marcus," he replied simply. "Don't be afraid, I'm not going to hurt you." Alyssa looked at him suspiciously, trying to analyze every detail. He had dark eyes that seemed to hold a mixture of coldness and empathy. But what confused her the most was the calmness in his demeanor in the face of such cruelty. "You kidnapped me?" she asked, her indignation growing. Marcus sighed and took a step forward. "Yes, but you're safe here for now." His answer was direct and emotionless. Alyssa felt a wave of panic, but at the same time there was a strange feeling that he wasn't being completely honest. She knew there was no way she could trust this man, but something in his eyes made her anger mix with a visceral fear. The silence between them was heavy. She wanted to scream, to fight, but the chains were stronger, and her body was still weak. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Because I need you here," Marcus replied, "and not for much longer. I just need some time. After that, you'll understand." He stepped away from the door and closed it behind him. Alyssa was left alone, staring at the colorless walls, trying to process what had just happened. Everything seemed like a nightmare, something impossible to believe. But the truth was, she was there, captive, and nothing seemed to matter anymore. Hours passed slowly. Fear and uncertainty took over Alyssa. What she didn't know was that, at that very moment, she was beginning a journey that would change her life in ways she could never imagine. The days that followed were filled with confusion and fear. Alyssa, still bound to the chair, had no idea what to expect. She tried to keep her mind sharp, but every time the door creaked open, a wave of dread washed over her. Marcus came and went at irregular intervals, always calm, always distant, but never with malice. Every time he entered the room, he would check on her, make sure she was all right, and leave without saying much. The silence between them was thick, like a wall neither could break. One afternoon, as the light dimmed and the room grew colder, he walked in with a tray of food. He placed it on the small table in front of her. Alyssa couldn't help but feel a pang of hunger, but she refused to show weakness. She wouldn't give him that satisfaction. "Eat," Marcus said simply, looking down at her with an unreadable expression. "I'm not hungry," she replied sharply, her voice a little hoarse from not speaking much. Marcus leaned against the wall, watching her carefully. His dark eyes seemed to search for something in her expression, as if he were trying to gauge her thoughts. Alyssa couldn't understand him. He wasn't the monster she had imagined, but that made everything more complicated. "You should eat," he said again, his voice softer this time, almost concerned. It was strange to her, this quiet kindness from someone who had kidnapped her. She looked up at him, her anger flaring once again. "Why are you doing this? What do you want from me?" Marcus sighed, running a hand through his messy hair. "I don't want anything from you," he said almost regretfully. I just need time. Time to figure things out. Alyssa's confusion deepened. Time for what? And why her? Why was she the one he had chosen? Why me? She asked, her voice trembling now, not just from fear, but from a deep frustration she couldn't express. Marcus's expression softened slightly, his gaze shifting to the floor as if he didn't have an answer. I don't know, he said after a long pause. Maybe I saw something in you. Something that made me think you could understand me. Or maybe it's just fate, but I won't lie. I didn't plan this. Alyssa stared at him, her mind racing. How could she trust anything he said? How could she believe that he hadn't planned this? You're a liar, she said, bitterness in her voice. This isn't fate. This is madness. Marcus looked at her, his face unreadable. For a moment, there was silence. Neither of them spoke. Alyssa's heart raced, her emotions swirling between anger, fear, and something else she didn't want to name. Marcus broke the silence. You don't have to trust me. I just want you to stay safe, at least for now. Alyssa shook her head. Safe? How is this safe? You've locked me in a room, chained me to a chair. How is any of this safe? Marcus took a step closer to her, his eyes intense but gentle. Because I'm not going to hurt you. You're not just a hostage to me. You're a person, and I'm not a monster. I can't promise you anything, but I can promise that I won't hurt you. Alyssa, exhausted and overwhelmed, looked at him for a long time. There was something in his eyes, something that made her question everything she had believed about him. But she quickly shook her head. I don't care what you say. I won't trust you. Marcus nodded, almost as if he expected her response. He turned to leave, but paused before the door. I'll be back in a little while, he said quietly, as if giving her space, as if giving her a choice. And with that, he closed the door behind him, leaving Alyssa alone in the dim room. She sat there, staring at the food he had left for her. Her stomach growled again, but she didn't dare touch it. The silence was deafening, but it was the only thing that made sense in this strange, twisted world she was now part of. And yet, as the hours stretched on, something inside her began to shift. A feeling she couldn't explain. Could it be possible that Marcus wasn't what he appeared to be? Could she be wrong about him? For now, Alyssa wasn't sure. But as much as she hated to admit it, she didn't know how long she could keep up this facade of indifference. Days blurred together in the cold, dim room. Alyssa had stopped keeping track of time. It was all a haze of fleeting hours and endless silence. Marcus came and went, always checking on her, always with that same guarded expression. He brought food, water, and occasionally, small things like a blanket or a change of clothes. Nothing extraordinary, yet everything felt off. Alyssa still hated him for what he had done, for the life he had stolen from her, but as the days passed, something began to shift inside her. She couldn't deny that there were moments, small, fleeting moments, where she didn't feel entirely terrified. Sometimes when Marcus sat across from her, watching her with an intensity she couldn't quite place, she found herself not wanting him to leave. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was something else. One day, Marcus brought a book with him. It was an old, leather-bound novel, one Alyssa had never seen before. He placed it on the table between them and sat down. You like to read, don't you? He asked, his voice low but with an odd tenderness in it. Alyssa looked at the book. I do, she replied cautiously, but I don't have the energy for that right now. Marcus nodded, as if he had expected that answer. I understand, but you might find it distracting. Alyssa stared at him, her thoughts racing. A distraction? From what? From the situation she was trapped in? The anger that boiled inside her flared up once again. She hated how he seemed so calm, so unaffected by everything that had happened. But then, her eyes fell on the book again. There was something about it, something familiar, almost comforting about the old cover. A strange feeling of curiosity tugged at her, and against her better judgment, she picked it up. Why did you bring this? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his seat. I thought it might give you something to focus on, something to occupy your mind. I know this situation is difficult. Alyssa couldn't help it. She looked at him with disbelief. You think a book is going to make me forget that I'm locked in here against my will? Marcus didn't answer right away. Instead, he studied her face as if trying to understand her better. There was something vulnerable in his gaze, something raw that didn't match the hardened exterior he projected. I never meant for this to happen, he said softly, almost to himself. I didn't want you to be here. I know it's not right, and I don't know how to fix it. I don't know what I'm doing. His words hung in the air, heavy with sincerity. Alyssa's anger faltered for just a moment. You're not a monster, are you? She asked, the question slipping out before she could stop it. You're human, like me, aren't you? Marcus looked taken aback by her question. He took a long breath and then looked away, his voice cracking slightly. I used to be. I'm not sure what I am anymore. Alyssa felt something stir inside her, something she wasn't prepared to confront. Empathy. She could see the cracks in his armor, the vulnerability he was trying so hard to hide. It made her uncomfortable, but at the same time, it made her question everything she had believed about him. I'm not here to be your friend, she said quickly, trying to regain control of the situation. I'm your prisoner, Marcus. You can't just pretend you're a nice guy and expect me to trust you. Marcus nodded, but his eyes lingered on hers for a long moment before he finally spoke. I don't expect you to trust me, but I never meant to hurt you. I didn't know what else to do. Alyssa sat back in her chair, her thoughts swirling. She couldn't deny the pull she felt toward him, even if she loathed the idea. Her heart told her one thing, her mind another. This was the beginning of something she couldn't explain, a bond she couldn't understand. The human heart was unpredictable, often irrational, but it was also capable of deep connections, even in the most twisted of circumstances. Marcus stood up to leave, but before he did, he turned to her one last time. I'll be back soon, he said quietly. If you want to read the book, it's yours. He closed the door behind him, leaving Alyssa alone once again with her thoughts. As the silence enveloped her, Alyssa glanced at the book he had left behind. She reached for it slowly, flipping through its pages. It was a distraction, just like Marcus had said, but perhaps for the first time, she was beginning to need one, and somewhere deep inside, she feared that Marcus might be starting to matter more than she wanted to admit. The days felt like weeks. Alyssa had lost track of time entirely, but there was one thing she couldn't ignore. Marcus's actions had started to confuse her. Despite the fact that he had kidnapped her, something about him was different. She had expected him to be cold, distant, even cruel, but instead he was unpredictable. One moment he was stern, a man who knew exactly what he wanted. The next he was quieter, almost soft in the way he spoke to her. She couldn't make sense of it. It wasn't until one particularly cold evening, when the air outside had grown frigid, that the first act of kindness came. Alyssa was shivering in her chair, the thin blanket Marcus had left her offering little comfort against the chill. She had tried to stay warm, huddling into the corner of the room, but the cold seemed to seep into her bones, making it impossible to escape the discomfort. When Marcus came in that night, she barely lifted her head to acknowledge him. The anger had dulled over the past few days, replaced by a dull ache of confusion. Are you cold? He asked, his voice softer than usual. Alyssa didn't respond. She was too tired to argue. Marcus seemed to hesitate for a moment before walking to the small closet in the corner of the room. He rummaged through it, muttering to himself as he found a thick woolen blanket. Without a word, he moved toward Alyssa, draping the blanket around her shoulders. His fingers brushed against her skin as he adjusted the fabric, and for a moment, Alyssa felt a strange warmth spread through her, more from the unexpected tenderness than the blanket itself. Thanks, she muttered, feeling a mixture of gratitude and suspicion. It was hard to accept something kind from someone who had taken everything from her. You're welcome, Marcus replied quietly, his eyes not meeting hers as he stepped back. I know it's not much, but I figured you could use it. Alyssa remained silent, still trying to process the oddness of it all. She had spent so much time hating him, resenting him for putting her in this situation. But in that moment, She felt a strange crack in the wall she had built up inside herself. Was it possible that this man, who had brought so much fear into her life, was capable of caring for someone else? Or was this just another part of his manipulation? She didn't know the answer, but something inside her softened. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. The question had been lingering on her mind for days, but it had never felt like the right time to ask. Now, as the blanket wrapped around her, it seemed like the moment had come. Marcus's gaze shifted to the floor as if he was considering her question carefully. He took a deep breath, looking almost tired. "I don't know," he admitted. "I never wanted this. I didn't plan it. But here we are, and I'm trying to keep you safe, at least from the worst of it." "Safe?" Alyssa repeated, her voice tinged with disbelief. "How is this safe? You're holding me against my will." "I know," he said, his tone somber. "I don't expect you to forgive me, but I don't want to hurt you, Alyssa. You have to believe that. Everything I've done so far, it's because I felt like I didn't have a choice. I never wanted this to happen. I didn't want you to be involved." Alyssa felt a knot in her chest. Was this guilt she was hearing? Regret? The words didn't match the reality of her situation, but there was something genuine in his voice, something she hadn't expected. For a moment, they both sat in silence, the air heavy with unspoken words. Alyssa glanced up at Marcus, her heart torn between the desire to hate him and the need to understand why he was doing all of this. But the truth was, she wasn't sure she wanted to know. The more she learned about him, the more complicated her emotions became. "How long will this last?" she asked, her voice breaking the silence. "I don't know," Marcus replied, his face unreadable. "I'm not sure where this is going, but I swear, I won't let anyone hurt you while you're here." Alyssa swallowed hard, the weight of his words sinking into her. She had been trained to distrust her captor, to resist the idea that he could ever be anything other than a villain. But the longer she stayed here, the more the lines between right and wrong blurred. It wasn't as simple as good versus evil anymore. Marcus was neither the hero nor the villain in her story. He was just a man. A man who had made a terrible choice but wasn't immune to the complexities of guilt and redemption. She didn't know where this would lead. Alyssa wasn't ready to forgive him, to accept the situation for what it was. But for the first time since she'd been taken, she felt a tiny seed of doubt sprout inside her. Maybe, just maybe, Marcus wasn't the monster she had thought. But she couldn't afford to let her guard down. Not yet. As he left the room, the door clicking shut behind him, Alyssa hugged the blanket tighter around her. Her heart was heavy with confusion, but there was something else too. Something she couldn't ignore. A flicker of hope. The days passed in a blur of routine. Marcus came and went, as he always did, bringing food, checking on her, and sometimes leaving small, unexpected gestures of kindness. Alyssa couldn't deny that a part of her had started to grow used to his presence, even if she still hated the situation she was trapped in. He was unpredictable, and that unpredictability made it harder to keep her emotions in check. One moment, he seemed like the man who had kidnapped her, the cold, calculating figure she feared. The next, he was someone she couldn't quite place, a man who appeared to be just as lost as she was. But then, one evening, everything changed. Marcus came into the room later than usual, carrying something under his arm, a thick envelope. It was unmarked, and there was an unusual heaviness in his demeanor. Alyssa had learned to read him by now, and the change in his usual calm was noticeable. There was a tension in the air that hadn't been there before. He set the envelope down on the table in front of her, avoiding her eyes. Alyssa narrowed her gaze, sensing something was different. "What's this?" she asked, her voice cautious. She didn't trust him enough to be curious about anything he gave her, but there was something compelling about the way he was acting. "It's my confession," Marcus said, his voice quieter than usual. He walked away from the table and leaned against the far wall, his back to her. The distance between them felt unusually large now. Alyssa stared at the envelope. It was plain, but the weight of it was undeniable. It was clear that whatever was inside was important to him. A confession? She repeated, the words tasting strange on her tongue. What are you confessing? Marcus took a long, slow breath, as if preparing himself for something he hadn't wanted to say. He didn't turn around to face her, his focus still on the wall, as if avoiding her eyes was easier than looking her in the face. I've been hiding something from you, he began, his voice heavy with an emotion Alyssa couldn't name. Something I've been running from for a long time. I didn't want you to know. I thought I could keep you safe without telling you the whole truth. Alyssa was silent for a long moment, studying him, trying to figure out what was going on. You've been hiding something from me? She asked, more confused than ever. What is it, Marcus? What is it you're not telling me? Marcus finally turned to face her, his expression unreadable, a storm of emotions flickering in his eyes. For the first time, he seemed unsure of himself, and that uncertainty unsettled her more than anything else. I'm not who you think I am, he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. I never was. I've made mistakes, huge ones, things that I can't undo. Alyssa felt her heart race in her chest. Was he admitting guilt? Was this some sort of twisted confession to manipulate her into feeling sorry for him? No, she said, shaking her head. Don't try to twist this, Marcus. You kidnapped me. You're not some misunderstood victim. You're a criminal. I know, he replied, his voice filled with regret. And I hate myself for it. But it's not as simple as just being a criminal. I'm a mess. I've been in and out of trouble my whole life. I've hurt people. I've made choices that I can never take back. And now here I am, holding you hostage. And I'm just as lost as I've ever been. Alyssa couldn't comprehend what he was saying. She had spent so long hating him, so long despising him for what he had done, and now he was telling her that he hated himself? The contradictions were overwhelming. Why are you telling me this now? She demanded. Why not before? Why keep me here at all? I don't have the answers, Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. But I can't live with myself anymore, not with the things I've done. And I don't want you to think I'm doing this out of some sick need to control you. I don't know why I did it, Alyssa. But I need you to know that I'm not a monster. I'm not. Alyssa sat there staring at him. The air between them was charged with an unfamiliar intensity, and she didn't know what to say. Part of her wanted to lash out, to scream at him for what he had done. But another part of her, one she didn't want to acknowledge, understood the pain in his voice. She couldn't help but feel that the man standing before her was more broken than she had realized. Why me? She whispered. Why did you take me? Marcus hesitated, his gaze softening. I don't know, he admitted. But when I saw you, I thought maybe you were the one person who could understand me. Maybe you were someone who wouldn't judge me, someone who could see me for who I really am. And I was wrong to bring you here. I was wrong to think I could make you feel safe. Alyssa's heart was torn in two. She wanted to hate him, to despise him for the pain he had caused her, but something inside her prevented it. He was a man, a flawed man who had made horrible choices, but a man all the same. And she found herself, against her will, feeling something for him, something she couldn't name. Don't expect me to forgive you, she said softly, but there was no fire in her words anymore. Don't expect me to feel sorry for you. Marcus nodded, his face a mask of sorrow. I don't expect that. I just wanted you to know the truth. The silence between them was heavy. Alyssa didn't know what to say or what to feel. The world she had built in her mind, where she was the victim and he was the villain, was crumbling. And in its place, something else was beginning to grow. The days felt like they were moving at a slower pace now. Alyssa couldn't escape the nagging thoughts that had started to consume her. She had always thought the world was simple. There were the good people, and there were the bad people. The lines were clear, and there was no room for gray areas. But with Marcus, everything was different. The longer she stayed with him, the more she realized that her understanding of right and wrong wasn't as clear-cut as she had once believed. After the confession, things between them had shifted. Marcus didn't try to manipulate her with kindness anymore, nor did he seem distant in the way he had when he first kidnapped her. There was an uncomfortable honesty between them now, a strange openness that left Alyssa feeling unsettled. It was as if the walls that had separated them before had crumbled, and they were left standing in the rubble, trying to figure out what to do next. One night, Marcus brought her a simple dinner. It was just a plate of pasta with sauce, but the gesture felt different this time. He didn't sit with her as he had before, didn't make small talk. Instead, he left the plate on the table and stepped back, as if giving her space. "How's the food?" he asked, his voice a little softer than usual. "It's fine," she replied, her voice distant. She wasn't hungry, but she ate anyway. The routine of it all was starting to wear on her. The room, the chair, the chains, they had all become a part of her life, but nothing about it felt real anymore. She was trapped, yes, but she was also changing. Alyssa could feel the shift in herself, the gradual breaking down of the walls she had built around her emotions. At first, she had been so focused on surviving, on finding a way out, that she hadn't allowed herself to feel anything. But now, she was starting to feel it all. The anger, the fear, the confusion, and, yes, even something that resembled pity. Marcus was sitting at the far side of the room, his back against the wall, his eyes distant. He wasn't looking at her, but Alyssa could feel his gaze on her, even without words. She finished eating, setting the plate down, and turned to him. "You said you wanted me to understand you," she said, her voice uncertain. "But the more you tell me, the more I don't get it. Why keep me here? Why not just let me go?" Marcus didn't answer immediately. He stared at the floor for a long time, and for a moment, Alyssa thought he wouldn't speak at all. But then he lifted his head, meeting her eyes for the first time in what felt like days. "I can't just let you go," he said quietly. "Not because I want to hurt you, but because I don't think I can handle it. I can't just let you walk out of here like this didn't happen." "You can't handle it?" Alyssa repeated, her voice filled with disbelief. "You think I can handle it? Being locked up here, treated like an object, something to control? You don't get to decide that for me." Marcus's eyes darkened, and for a brief moment, Alyssa saw a flicker of anger cross his face. But just as quickly, it was gone. He sighed, a deep, long exhale that seemed to carry the weight of everything he had been holding in. "I know," he said, his voice low. "I know it's wrong. I've been wrong. But I'm not trying to control you. I'm not trying to make you part of this life I'm stuck in. I don't know how to make it right. I don't know how to fix any of it." His vulnerability made Alyssa pause. She had spent so long seeing him as the villain in her story, a monster who had taken her freedom and her safety. But in that moment, as he looked at her with something resembling shame in his eyes, she realized that maybe he was just as lost as she was. Maybe they were both trapped in their own versions of a nightmare. "You said you didn't know what to do," Alyssa said softly, her voice betraying the hint of empathy she didn't want to feel. "But maybe you don't have to do anything. Let me go back to my life, and you can start over. Do something different." Marcus shook his head slowly, the faintest trace of sadness on his face. "I wish it were that simple. But it's not. You don't understand. If I let you go, I'm just letting myself off the hook. And I can't do that. Not after everything." "Everything?" in her chest. "What do you mean by everything?" Marcus stood up slowly, walking over to the window that barely let any light through. He stared out into the dark night, the city lights far below casting shadows across his face. "I've done things," he said, almost to himself. "Things that can't be undone. I've hurt people, Alyssa. I've hurt good people. And I don't deserve a second chance. I don't deserve to be forgiven." Alyssa's heart ached as she listened to him, the rawness in his words cutting deeper than she had expected. She had thought of him as a villain, a one-dimensional monster who had taken her life away. But in that moment, she saw him as something more complex. A broken man, struggling with his own guilt and demons. "And me?" she asked quietly. "What do I deserve, Marcus? What am I to you in all of this?" He turned to face her again, his eyes filled with something between regret and fear. You're the one thing I've done right. And that's why I can't let you go." Alyssa's mind raced. She had spent so long hating him, blaming him for everything that had happened to her. But now, in the midst of her own internal struggle, she couldn't help but question everything. Was she just another part of his past that he was trying to fix? Or was she something else entirely? Someone who could make him see the person he could still become? The silence that fell between them was heavy, charged with 1,000 unspoken words. Neither of them knew what to say next, or if there was anything left to say. But Alyssa knew one thing for certain. The walls between them were crumbling, and neither of them would be the same after this. The quiet tension that had settled between Alyssa and Marcus over the past days began to feel suffocating. The more they spoke, the more Alyssa found herself torn between the overwhelming anger she still felt and the strange empathy that had been growing inside her. Each day she spent in the small, dimly lit room with Marcus made it harder to distinguish where the truth ended and where her emotions began. She couldn't deny the pull she felt toward him, nor could she ignore the anger and fear that had been the driving force behind her every thought since the moment she had been taken. But the lines between right and wrong were no longer as clear as they had once been. One afternoon, after another silent exchange of awkward glances and half-formed words, Marcus broke the quiet with something unexpected. He was standing by the window again, looking out at the skyline of New York, his back to her. His posture was stiff, almost like he was preparing himself for something, but Alyssa couldn't imagine what it could be. "I've been thinking," Marcus began, his voice low. "I need to tell you something." Alyssa had heard him say those words before, and each time it had left her more confused than the last. She didn't respond at first, her mind still swirling with everything he had confessed. But something about the way he said it, like he had been holding onto this thought for far too long, compelled her to listen. "What is it?" she asked cautiously. Marcus turned around to face her, his eyes searching hers. He looked almost vulnerable. Alyssa's heart skipped a beat at the sight of him. This man who had been nothing but a source of fear for so long, now standing before her as someone who seemed as conflicted as she was. "I've been keeping something from you," he continued, his tone growing serious. "Something about why I'm doing all of this. And I think it's time you knew the full truth." Alyssa's heart tightened. She had heard a lot of half-truths and vague confessions from him over the past few weeks, but nothing that had made sense, nothing that had ever been enough to justify what he had done. "All right," she said, sitting up straighter in the chair, her eyes narrowing. "I'm listening." Marcus hesitated for a long moment, as though choosing his words carefully. The silence in the room seemed to grow heavier, as if the walls were closing in around them. Finally, he spoke. "It's not just you," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "It's not just about you at all. The reason I'm keeping you here, the reason I can't just let you go, it's because I'm afraid. Afraid of losing control. Afraid of being alone." Alyssa was silent, processing his words. Fear, control, loneliness. These were the same emotions that had driven him to make the decisions he had, but hearing him admit them out loud hit her in a way she hadn't expected. "What does that have to do with me?" she asked, though she was already beginning to sense where this was headed. Marcus ran a hand through his hair, his eyes darting to the floor. "It has everything to do with you," he said quietly. "Because when I first saw you, when I first took you, I wasn't thinking about what was right or wrong. I wasn't thinking about anything except that I needed someone. I needed someone to fill the emptiness inside me." His words were raw, almost painfully honest, and Alyssa felt a strange flicker of something, pity, perhaps, or empathy, stir within her. It wasn't that she forgave him, not by a long shot, but she couldn't help but feel a shift, a softening in her own heart. "You think you need me?" she said, her voice steady, though her insides were churning. "But you don't. You're just using me to fill some void inside of you. That's not love, Marcus. That's fear." Marcus winced at her words, but there was no anger in his expression, only something darker, something heavier. "I know," he whispered. "And that's why I'm so messed up. I don't know how to fix myself, Alyssa. I've been alone for so long, and I thought maybe if I took you, if I had someone with me, it would all make sense again. But it doesn't." Alyssa's chest tightened as she listened to him. She had spent so much time resenting him, hating him for what he had done. But in that moment, she saw him not as the villain in her story, but as someone who was equally as lost as she was. He was a man drowning in his own fears, using the only method he knew to survive, no matter how wrong it was. "You're not alone anymore," she said softly, the words coming from somewhere deep within her. "But you need to let me go. If you really want to change, if you want to be better, you have to stop running from your own demons. You can't keep me here as a crutch." Marcus looked at her, his eyes filled with pain, and for the first time, Alyssa saw the man behind the mask, the man who wasn't just a captor, but a person who had been running from his own failures for far too long. "I don't know if I can," he whispered, as if the weight of his own confession was too much to bear. Alyssa stared at him, her heart heavy with the understanding that there was no easy way out for either of them. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew that the longer they both stayed in this twisted dance of power and guilt, the more they would both lose. "I think you can," she said, her voice more confident than she felt. "But only if you stop trying to control everything. Let go, Marcus. Let me go." The words hung in the air between them, and for a long time, neither of them spoke. They simply stood there, each lost in their own thoughts, facing the reality of what had been and what could never be. And in that moment, Alyssa wasn't sure who was more trapped, the man who had taken her or the woman who was trying to free herself. The silence that had stretched between Alyssa and Marcus seemed to last forever. The words she had spoken hung in the air, fragile and heavy, like the weight of unspoken truths. She had asked him to let her go, to stop trying to control everything. She had asked him to face his demons, and she could see the struggle in his eyes. He was torn between what he wanted and what he knew he needed to do. For a long time, neither of them moved. Alyssa sat still in the chair, her mind racing with conflicting emotions. Part of her wanted to hate him. She wanted to scream at him, demand her freedom, and forget all of this ever happened. But another part of her, the part that had started to see him differently, couldn't ignore the vulnerability in his eyes. Marcus shifted his weight, his face hardening once more. "I don't know if I can just let you go," he said quietly, almost as though speaking to himself. "It's not that simple." Alyssa swallowed hard. She had expected him to resist, to hold on to her, but the words he spoke were more of an admission than a denial. He wasn't just holding her captive physically, he was holding on to her emotionally too. His fear had become his prison as much as the chains that bound her. "You can't keep me here forever," Alyssa said, her voice steady, though her heart was pounding. "It's not healthy, Marcus, for either of us." Marcus didn't answer immediately. He walked to the window again, staring out into the night. His posture was tense, but there was a shift in his demeanor, a kind of quiet acceptance that Alyssa hadn't seen before. "I never thought it would get this far," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "When I first took you, I don't know what I thought. I didn't think it would be like this. I didn't think I'd start to care about you, and now I don't know what to do." Alyssa felt a pang of something she didn't want to acknowledge. She had spent so much time hating him, resenting him for what he had done. But in this moment, hearing his words, she realized that he wasn't just some faceless villain. He was a man who had made terrible choices, but he was also someone who was grappling with his own mistakes. "You're not a monster, Marcus," she said softly, almost to herself. "You just don't know how to fix what you've done." Marcus turned to face her, his eyes searching hers. "I don't think I can fix it. I don't think I can fix anything anymore." His voice cracked, and for the first time, the mask he had carefully constructed began to slip. "I've done things that can't be undone, and I don't deserve forgiveness. Alyssa's chest tightened at his words. The rawness in his voice was like a knife twisting in her gut. She had always thought of him as the villain in her story, but now she could see the cracks in his armor. He wasn't the monster she had made him out to be. He was a man, flawed, broken, but still human. I don't think forgiveness is something you can just give to yourself, Alyssa said quietly, her voice softer now. But I don't think you should have to carry all of this alone either. Marcus's gaze softened, and he took a step toward her. The distance between them felt smaller now, like they were no longer the strangers they had once been. She wasn't sure what was happening between them, whether it was the exhaustion of the situation or something deeper, but for the first time in a long time, Alyssa felt something other than fear. It was an emotion she couldn't name, but it made her heart beat a little faster. "You don't understand," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've hurt so many people. I can't just walk away from all of it." "You're not walking away, Marcus," Alyssa said, her voice steady and strong. "But you can stop running. You can stop hiding behind your mistakes and start facing them." His eyes searched hers, a flicker of something, hope, dancing in the depths of his gaze. "You really think I can?" Alyssa nodded slowly. "You're not the same person you were when you first took me. You don't have to keep running from who you are. You can change, but only if you stop trying to control everything." Marcus looked down at the floor for a long moment, his mind clearly weighing her words. When he looked up again, there was something different in his eyes, something vulnerable, something that hadn't been there before. "I don't know if I can make it right," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "but I'm willing to try. For you. For us." Alyssa felt a strange surge of something that could have been hope, or fear, or even confusion. But whatever it was, she didn't fight it. She knew in that moment that this wasn't just about her freedom anymore. It was about them both trying to heal, trying to move past the darkness that had consumed them. "I don't know what happens next," Alyssa said softly, her heart racing. "But I think we need to figure that out together." Marcus didn't respond right away. He simply stood there, his eyes locked on hers, the weight of everything between them hanging in the air. For the first time since she had been taken, Alyssa felt a flicker of something that resembled peace. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't even close, but it was a beginning. And sometimes, that was all they had. The days that followed were a strange mix of tension and tentative understanding. Alyssa could feel the shift in Marcus, the quiet resolve that had taken root in him after their conversation. It wasn't immediate, but she could see the changes in him. He was no longer just the man who had taken her. He was starting to be someone else, someone who, for the first time, seemed genuinely aware of the consequences of his actions. The atmosphere in the room felt different now, less suffocating. Marcus still came and went, but the air between them had shifted. He no longer tried to control her, no longer tried to fill the empty spaces in his life with her presence. He had stopped pretending to be the person he thought he should be, and in doing so, he had given her something she hadn't expected, a sense of freedom, even if she wasn't physically free yet. Alyssa didn't know if she could forgive him, not yet, but she did know that something had changed, and in some strange, unexplainable way, that change had made her feel less trapped. She wasn't just the captive anymore. She was a person who was starting to make decisions for herself, even in this small, dark room. One night, as the city lights of New York twinkled outside the window, Marcus came into the room with a small suitcase. He looked at Alyssa with a mix of uncertainty and determination. His jaw was set, his eyes serious. "I can't keep you here any longer," he said, his voice low but steady. "It's not right. I know that now. And I know that I've made mistakes. But I'm not going to make any more." Alyssa stood up from her chair, her heart pounding in her chest. "What are you saying?" Marcus opened the suitcase slowly, revealing a set of clothes, simple jeans, a t-shirt, and a jacket. It was the kind of outfit she might have worn before everything changed, before her life had been turned upside down by him. "I've arranged for you to leave," he said. "You're free, Alyssa. You can go home. I'll make sure you're safe." Alyssa felt a surge of disbelief. It was too much to take in. She had spent so long waiting for this moment, but now that it was here, She didn't know how to respond. Part of her wanted to run, to get as far away from him as possible. But another part of her, a part she had been trying to ignore, felt a deep, painful ache. She didn't want to leave him like this, but she knew that staying would only lead to more complications, more pain. "What about you?" she asked, her voice quiet. "What happens to you?" Marcus sighed deeply, looking down at the suitcase. "I'll figure it out. I'll turn myself in. I'll face what I've done." For the first time in a long time, there was no mask in his eyes, no defensiveness, no walls, just a man, standing before her, taking responsibility for his actions. Alyssa's heart clenched as she watched him. She didn't know what to say, didn't know how to feel. The man who had taken her, who had held her captive, was offering her freedom. The world she had known before was completely different from the world she was walking into now, and she wasn't sure how to navigate it. But there was one thing she did know. She couldn't stay in this room anymore. She couldn't keep allowing herself to be consumed by anger and fear. "You really mean it," she said softly, her voice cracking slightly. "You really want me to go?" Marcus nodded slowly. "You deserve to be free, Alyssa. You deserve to live your life. I'm not going to stop you anymore." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was thick, filled with all the things they couldn't say. Alyssa could feel the weight of everything between them, the mistakes, the regrets, the moments they had shared. But she also felt the sting of finality. She was leaving. She had to. She reached down and picked up the clothes from the suitcase. Her fingers trembled as she touched them. She was free. The word echoed in her mind, but it felt surreal. She wasn't sure how to process it. "Thank you," she whispered, though it didn't feel like enough. It wasn't just about what Marcus had done for her. It was about everything they had been through, the pain, the fear, the confusion, and how, in the end, they had both been changed by it. Marcus didn't answer at first. He just looked at her, his eyes filled with something she couldn't name. Then, after a long pause, he said, "I hope you find peace, Alyssa. I hope you find happiness." With that, he turned and walked toward the door. But before he left, he glanced back at her one last time. "I'll always remember you," he said quietly. "No matter where I am." Alyssa's throat tightened as she nodded. She couldn't bring herself to say anything more. She was free, but the journey ahead would be long, and the road back to who she once was would not be easy. As Marcus stepped out of the room and closed the door behind him, Alyssa stood there, the clothes in her hands, her heart racing. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, and that was enough.